respected dignitaries, and all the participants. It's my proud privilege to welcome you all for the national level e-conclave titled National Education Policy 2020 Futuristic Policy for Aspiring Mind, organized by Karnataka State Rural Development and Panchayat Raj University Gadag and Center for Education and Social Studies Bangalore, in association with renowned national, central, state, and private universities and organizations such as, which has been mentioned by Dr. Dharani, Mahatma Gandhi National Council of Rural Education, Hyderabad, Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, Central University of Kerala, Rani Channamma University, Belagavi, Vijayanagar Sri Krishna Deva Raya University, Ballari, Azim Premji University, Bangalore, and Nirma University, Ahmedabad. We are all fortunate today to have amidst us in this national level e-conclave resource persons who have strived and toiled for drafting the historic national education policy. The people who have hands-on on national education policy will be sharing their insights on this National Education Policy 2020. I welcome my beloved and my dear friend, educationist, the member of the drafting committee, Dr. M.K. Sridhar, who happens to be giving us the keynote address in this conclave. I welcome you, sir. We also have with us Dr. T.V. Kattimani, who will be joining late now, who was the member of the committee for drafting the National Education Policy, and he is also the member of the Executive Council of our university. I welcome Dr. D.V. Kattimani. I welcome Dr. Shakila Shamshu, who was secretary to the committee to draft the National Education Policy. I welcome you, ma'am. We have also with us today Dr. Anurag Beher, who was one of the members for drafting on the Committee of National Education Policy. I welcome you, sir. Further, I welcome the statutory officers, academicians, researchers, educationists, faculty members, students, and participants for this national level e-conclave. As you are all aware, the National Education Policy 2020 was approved by the Central Cabinet of Government of India on July 29, 2020, after elaborate public discussion, dialogue, and feedback from all the stakeholders across India. The purpose of this conclave is to provide broad exposition, insights regarding the various facets of national education policy. I look forward for a fruitful debate and direction for all the aspiring minds to draw a futuristic policy intervention for the National Education Policy 2020. I am also quite hopeful that this NEP will transform the landscape of education sector, that is Shiksha Kshetra. Sabko punah ek baar swagat, suswagat, dhanyavad.
Thank you very much, sir. I now request Professor Madheswaran, Director, Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bengaluru, to give away introductory remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Karini. Respected the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Vishnukant, and my Guruji and my mentor, Professor M.K. Sridhar, and other dignitaries and the Vice Chancellor of Central, State, and the private university. It is a great privilege for all the higher education institutions have joined and conducting this national level e-enclave on NEP 2020 Futuristic Policy for Aspiring Minds. Before I start, I would like to inform all the participants here. Let us all join and welcome Professor M.K. Sridhar. He has been nominated by the Government of India as a UGC member. So after he has become a UGC member, I hope this is the first enclave in such a way that he is addressing the new education policy. He is one of the architects of this new education policy. And also I join the Vice Chancellor of Karnataka State Rural Development and Panchayat Raj University to welcome Professor Katimani, also a member committee for the draft of national education policy. See, it is a great privilege for me that Professor M.K. Sridhar requested me to say some few initial remarks. Of course, I was a little scared that in front of my mentor and Guruji, who has a wisdom and worked for a long time in his lifetime to strengthen the quality of the higher education in general and the social science in particular. So with this, sir, I would like to say, to initiate the few initial remarks. Suppose if I commit some mistake in my initial remark, I request Professor Sridhar to excuse me. Sir, all we know that the National Education Policy 2020 is a culmination of various programs and policies evolved over time, which is further blended with the modern day requirements for preparing the children of India for the future revolution. However, it strikingly differs from the earlier policies and programs in terms of its approach on focusing each student instead of approaching it via universal or every child. This is a paradigm shift as NEP 2020 attempts to address the needs of each child. The key connecting thread in the policy is flexibility, be it school or higher education. Indeed, the policy brings in multi-layered flexibility. That is, what I mean multi-layered flexibility, namely in the structure of both school and higher education, the vertical and horizontal movement across courses, between general and vocational system, etc. And also, there is a key shift in the focus of NEP 2020 is the multidisciplinary and holistic education. And this approach indeed coincide with Delors committees, in UNESCO, I remember in UNESCO 1997, there is a commission called Delors Commission. This approach indeed coincide with Delors Commission, Commission's 4 pillars on education. What are the 4 pillars of this Delors Commission on education is learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. So it is important to note that the first 2 pillars, learning to know and to do, provide the livelihood skills. That means hard skills. The 3rd and 4th pillars, not only equally important in themselves, but need to be balanced with the first 2 pillars, learning to live together and learning to be. That is nothing but your soft skill will be more in demand with the growing artificial intelligent robotic world. So given this example, this NEP attempts to blend both hard and soft skill, rather the left and right hemisphere of the brain. The very important focus is the shift of the pedagogy approach that of conceptual, critical, and creative, unlike the emphasis on road learning earlier. The major and welcoming change in this policy is the evaluation and assessment, which is CCE. That means continuous and comprehensive evaluation. This approach facilitates the teachers and the students to look at development of individual rather than mere achievement, besides recognizing the difference in learning ability of each individual via child tracking. One another shift in focus is the recognition of diversity and local context to be incorporated into the curriculum. I think this I used to hear this kind of the vision and mission right from the Knowledge Commission when Professor K. Sridhar was a member secretary of Knowledge Commission of Government of Karnataka. He used to talk about this diversity and local context. Of course, I'm very happy that this policy is recognized the diversity and local context to be incorporated into the curriculum, though the National Curriculum Framework 2020-21 will be prepared by NCRT. Another major shift is the regulation framework and structures like establishing State School Standards Authority and Higher Education Council of India. And also another welcoming change in this policy is the focus on the integration of vocation and our skill-based learning both in school and higher education. This also be integrated with the Indian knowledge and various skills. Then, while saying the major welcoming change, the other welcoming change is on teacher qualification. That Bachelor of Elementary Education will become the mandatory qualification. Also, teacher education will be integrated to multidisciplinary higher education. And finally, the role of technology is well recognized and accordingly given its due importance in this policy. And there may be many more such welcoming changes in the policy, like integrating early childhood education in the schooling, restructuring the schooling system, etc. These are all the major shift and the focus that I'm sure Professor Sridhar is the esteemed speaker will reflect on this. While saying this, all these welcoming changes, sir, with your permission, I would like to say some 4 challenges which normally you must have heard from other commentators, but nevertheless, given this opportunity that Professor Sridhar and other members may take into account the kind of challenges that the policy need to look into it. I don't want to say many challenges, only 3 or 4 challenges, which is haunting, and most of the social scientists and the higher education institution, they're talking about it. And the first one is that the policy, though it talks about a lot of welcoming changes, it has to look into the anomalies in the existing system. Sir, for instance, one of the major problem areas is teacher accountability and the teacher quality. And of course, this has to be dwell more into this. Yet another weak area is the teacher-centric pedagogy. Though a lot has been said about characteristics of learning, namely conceptual critical, but the teacher-centric pedagogy that has to, though a lot has been said about the characteristics of learning. But another thing is that although the policy does focus on the socio-economically disadvantaged group, I feel that it should give some more adequate and give the intensity of the problem. So all of you know that education plays a vital role for the deprived section of the population to move out of poverty and the associated problems of poverty and the livelihood. The approach and strategies to address them needs to be looked into it. For instance, the policy suggests non-formal education, open distance learning, technology-based solution, etc., to the unreached sections and areas. Though it's said, but still there should be adequate attention has to be given to the intensity of the problem of socio-economically disadvantaged group. Though the policy gives emphasis on skill-based learning, if we relate knowledge versus skill, the clear divide between haves and haves not comes out on the surface. Sir, this can widen the existing economic and education inequality in the society. Quite often, very recently also, Sridhar Saibru, myself, we were talking something about to have some collaborative work on education inequality. Sir, so what I'm saying is that though the policy gives emphasis on skill-based learning, if we relate knowledge versus skill, the clear divide between haves and have-not comes out on the surface, sir. So this can wide existing economic and education inequality in the society. In other words, I want to say this can be said like learning to know and to do for the less privileged versus all the four pillars of education for the privileged, sir. And the third challenge I would like to mention here is the significance of lifelong learning, skilling and reskilling in the current and the future. So that also have to be addressed slightly in the policy. And fourth thing, sir, all of you know, all the higher education institution VCs are sitting here. Professor Sridhar also knows very well. Sir, we have been talking about the Kothari Commission recommendation is that the 6% of GDP has to be spent for education. And when Kothari was announced, that time the GR in higher education was just around 3%. But sir, for achieving 50% GER, what is the target which you had given in higher education? From the current 26% itself would require much higher share of GDP, let alone universal school education, starting from ECC at age 3. And the another challenge is that the private participation and privatization of both school and higher education is happening at substantial proportions, that all of you know. Sir. Apart from the regulatory mechanism, which will become common for public and private education institutions, the policy is rather little. There is some argument, but little silent on this.
We may have to cut short, sir.
Yes, except for some mandatory disclosure. Finally, my last few words, whatever I said, overall, the NEP brings in welcoming changes in the structure, flexible and multidisciplinary, holistic and skill-oriented approach, regulation, teacher qualification, etc. Now, the challenge is how it is being rolled out and implemented. Let us hear from Professor Sridhar, is one of the architects of this NEP 2020. And I thank Professor Vaikunt, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Karnataka State Rural Development University, and SES for giving this opportunity. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. I now request Professor Ramachandra Gowda, Vice Chancellor, Rani Chennamma University, Belagavi, to introduce Professor M.K. Sridhar Ji, Member, Committee for Draft NEP. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Madam. Good morning, one and all who are joined this webinar. Respected dignitaries and invitees, it is my proud privilege to introduce Professor M.K. Sridhar to the persons who have joined this. Professor M.K. Sridhar did his PhD from the prestigious Mysore University under the guidance of Professor B.R. Ananthan, who happens to be our founder, Vice Chancellor. And the professor has served as a senior lecturer in the Vijaya College, Bangalore, and later joined as associate professor in Canara Bank School of Management, Bangalore University. Later he became professor, then headed the Canara Bank School of Management as a director, and also served as Dean Faculty of Commerce and Management for Bangalore University. He successfully guided 4 MPhil students and 11 PhD scholars, published more than 30 papers, and completed 11 research projects. He is a trainer and a social activist for social and national causes. His life sketch was published as a book entitled Sahasra Padi in Kannada. He was profiled as an achiever by a few newspapers and TV channels. He was conferred with Kannada Rajyaswa Award by Government of Karnataka, and also General President Gold Medal by Indian Science Congress Association. He served as Member Secretary of Karnataka Knowledge Commission and Karnataka State Innovation Council, and a member of Central Advisory Board of Education, MHRD. So recently, actually, he is the architect of this National Education Policy. He served as member of the committee to draft National Education Policy under the chairmanship of Professor Dr. Kasturi Rangan. And Professor has served as expert committee in technology-enabled learning of Government of Karnataka. Presently, he is the Executive Council member of the Central University, Kerala, Vice President of Red Cross Society, Karnataka chapter, and President of Center for Education and Social Studies, CES. Then Yuvaka Sangha, member of Task Force on NEP in Karnataka, as well as ICSSR Senior Fellow at ISAC. Recently, by recognizing professor's contribution to the higher education, the central government and MHRD has nominated Professor M.K. Sridhar as a member of UGC. Sir, we are proud of you, sir. So once again, on behalf of all who are present here, I'm welcoming you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I now request Professor M.K. Sridhar ji to give away keynote address. Over to you, sir.
ಇವತ್ತು ಈ ಸಮ್ಮೇಳನದಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿರುವಂಥ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನನ್ನ ಹೃದಯಪೂರ್ವಕ ವಂದನೆಗಳನ್ನ ಸಲ್ಲಿಸ್ತಾ, आप सब लोग जो आज इकट्ठा हुए हैं, जो प्रमुख लोग विषय के बारे में बोलने वाले हैं, ज्यादा लोग सुनने वाले हैं और ज्यादा लोग इसके लिए काम करने वाले हैं. I will like to thank all of you for having given this opportunity. I am very happy that different kinds of organizations, institutions working in the field and also for the field of education have come together. I am seeing a very interesting trend today in this conclave. Whatever that then policy has really talked about, if multidisciplinary has to come, all these things, if they have to become reality, there has to be more and more collaboration at the level of disciplines, at the level of institutions, and at the level of various stakeholders of education. I think that is very evident today, that all such central universities, state universities, private universities, research institutions, and some NGOs, all of them have come together. There cannot be a better demonstration of the spirit of the policy than this e-conclave organized by all of you. So I'd like to congratulate, and I'd like to congratulate Professor Vishnukant from Rural Development, Panchayat Raj University and CES, and all other organizations who have come forward to make it a reality. See, first of all, let me say one very important thing. Somebody whoever introduced or talked, they were calling me in a direct or indirect way architect. Let me tell you, friends, nobody is architect of this policy. In fact, the 132 crores of people of our country, they are the real architects of this policy, because this policy has taken nearly 5.5 years to take a shape and to come out. The other day, when University Grants Commission organized a conclave on this policy, where I think you must have seen the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, addressing all of us. On that day, I made some small statistics there. You may be surprised, this policy has taken 5.5 years. 66 months, 1980 days, and 47,525 hours. A small calculation for it to get evolved. And you will also be surprised, happy, not surprised, happy, that input has come from nearly 1,10,000 villages, 3,250 blocks, 406 districts. And do you know, at different levels put together, nearly 1,80,000 suggestions had come. And I remember nearly 71,000 hard copies of the suggestions were looked into. Why I am trying to say all this is, if this policy has evolved today, has arrived at today, the architects are the people who made all this happen.
Yes.
So friends, the first point I would like to state here is that it has undergone widest consultation of all the stakeholders, because I have attended and interacted with thousands of people in the process of all this 2.5 to 3 years. When people were coming out and participating, I could see in their eyes a kind of aspiration. I think they were feeling, you know, a time has come for our education system to reform and take us forward. This is the kind of aspiration that people were having. I think all that aspirations have to be given shape. You may not believe, you know, when we used to go around and talk about and consult, without any discrimination, without any reservation, people used to come and tell us. I remember, you know, because the technical secretariat was located in Bangalore, one day we asked the transgender group to come and present what is that they expect. You know, the kind of enthusiasm with which they came and told us, you may not believe, this is very moving. The transgender activists came and said, sir, we don't want arms, we want education. You might see, you know, every traffic signal people coming there, transgender. But they said, we want education. And even yesterday, a friend of mine had called from Mumbai. He was in an interaction on the policy. Then in the course of the discussion, some student raised a question. And the student said, it seems, sir, I am in second year. I am only feeling so bad that why did I take birth earlier? I am not going to get the benefit of this policy. That is the kind of aspiration that boy has. So friends, what I am trying to say is, the policy is a reflection of the aspirations of the people, that we want something better, we want something for our country. And secondly, if you take what is that aspiration, what is the dream that people have? One is their own aspiration about themselves, their families, their own things. See, I need to come up, I need to settle down, I need to become better, I need to be skilled, I need to become competent. That part is definitely there. So every student wants better education, better quality. Every child in school wants better things. So there is an aspiration as far as an individual and family is concerned. But I see a larger aspiration of our country and of our society and community. That people want, as a country, as a society, we need to develop. Because lot of things are very evident on the horizon. There is talk about New India. There is talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think in the Committee of Nations, we are not going there with a begging bowl, friends. We are now going there with a sense of confidence, with a sense of identity for our country. Whether it is foreign policy, whether it is economic policy, whether it is diplomacy, whether it is solar energy production, whether it is yoga, whether it is pandemic, we have reached a better phase and we have some kind of identity. I think it is time that through this policy, making use of this policy, we will also build that kind of identity in the field of education also. So what I would like to say the next couple of minutes, the aspiration part is one, but at the same time, the aspiration cannot come just like that. No, the aspirations will come from our past. It is 5,000 plus years of civilizational wisdom we have. And even whether it is formal or non-formal education tradition is there in our country. All that we are deriving from that. And we are standing on the present scenario, the present challenges, the present problems. For example, Rural Development University and the MGNCRE, they have organized, they are part of this. ISEC also. There are a lot of challenges at the rural level, at the different levels. But then whether the education policy can address that. So like that, we are standing on the present. At the same time, we need to have clarity with regard to our future vision. So therefore, this policy is the outcome of the interaction of the past, present, and future. As a result, I cannot neglect the past, but I should not ignore the present, and at the same time that I need to grow. The other dimension is, even though we say Atmanirbhar Bharat and the vision of the policy is, Indian-centered education system, we need to look into ourselves, we need to strengthen ourselves, but not in an isolation manner. We don't want to remain for ourselves. We want to cater to the entire world. So therefore, we need to emerge as a knowledge superpower. So friends, what I would like to say is that I myself personally has been working in the field of education as an activist. I was an activist as a student. I was an activist as a teacher all through my life. Whatever that we used to dream that some change has to happen in education and things like that, I think in the front of our own eyes during our time, some policy has come. I agree that there are any number of challenges. Professor Madheshwaran was talking about challenges. Yes, I agree that there are challenges. And I'm not saying that the policy is perfect. But all of us, if we can join hands, I think we will take it better. So what I feel is, because some of my colleagues, they'll be discussing the other features of the policy. So I am not doing that. Only what I would like to leave behind is only this much. After a lot of effort, a policy has come. After tremendous based on the tremendous aspirations of the people, the policy has come. And the Prime Minister has very clearly stated on that day, this policy has the stamp of my political will. We will definitely implement this. And I'm also seeing how the state of Karnataka is taking a lead in this regard. I got a small presentation from Uttar Pradesh. I got some inquiry from Madhya Pradesh. And the education ministers of 16 states of India, they were in touch with me to take this forward. So I think if we can play our cards very well, appropriately, there is no doubt that the policy will come up to the aspirations of the people. You and me, many of us, some of us may not be there to realize, I don't know. But at the same time, we are there at a historic time when the policy is announced, when it is going to be taken up. So once again, I take this opportunity to thank all of you for having taken this initiative and take it forward so that every student, every teacher, every institution knows the spirit and letter and also knows the duties with regard to making national education policy a reality. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I kindly request Professor Sidhu P. Algur, Vice Chancellor, Vijayanagara Sri Krishnadevaraya University, Ballari, to introduce Professor Anurag Behar, Vice Chancellor, Ajim Premji University, Bengaluru, to all of us. Over to you, sir.
Very good morning to one and all. At the outset, I take this opportunity on behalf of VSKU Ballari to congratulate Professor M.K. Sridhar for being nominated as a member of UGC. The dignitaries, the Vice Chancellor of the various universities, the faculty members of the various universities across the country, and all dear students, friends. I consider it a great pleasure to introduce the second resource person of this e-conclave, Dr. Anurag Behar. Friends, Dr. Anurag Behar is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Wipro Limited, CEO for Ajim Premji Foundation, and Vice Chancellor of Ajim Premji University. Previously, he has served as the CEO of Wipro Infrastructure Engineering. Anurag has served on the board of Wipro GE Healthcare Limited and of the Terry University. He serves on the National Mission on Teachers and Teacher Education, the Government of India Implementation Committee for the Justice Verma Commission, and with the CII's National Climate Change Council. He is also one of the members of Drafting Committee of National Education Policy. Now, Dr. Anurag Behar is going to express his views on towards transforming school education. Now, over to Dr. Anurag Behar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning to everybody and namaskar. I hope I am audible to everybody. If somebody can just confirm that I am audible. Dr. Dharani.
अनुराग जी, आपका थोड़ा और साउंड ठीक रहना चाहिए.
ठीक है, अभी बेहतर है?
अभी बेहतर है, अभी बेहतर है.
जी हाँ, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. तो फिर से सबको नमस्कार और गुड मॉर्निंग. बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है. मैं देख रहा हूँ करीब 523 लोग इस ई कॉन्क्लेव में हैं. उससे साफ जाहिर होता है, it's very clear that there is so much of interest and desire to understand what is the national education policy about. This is the first time in 34 years that we have a comprehensive national education policy. And it is, as many scholars have now commented, it is truly transformational. The only thing about that being truly transformational is, as all of you are familiar, हम लोग सब जानते हैं, that the transformation will happen on the basis of implementation. So we have got I think, like all of you think, an absolutely wonderful policy. As in English is said, it's like a wish list of things that we would have desired. Now the task is to convert from here to implementation. And that will then give us the kind of education system, and then perhaps the platform for the kind of country that we are building. With that sort of preamble, I will talk about school education, and I will talk about school education in the details of the policy. And what I will try to do is, I will try to thread it together. You know, the policy is a 64-page document. The draft national education policy, which was developed by the Dr. Kasturirangan committee, on which the national education policy is based, was a 484-page document. And as Dr. Sridhar mentioned, it took 5.5 years because it has the wisdom of, I would say, thousands and thousands of people. So all of you collected in this forum, my first request to you is to read both the national education policy, which has been approved by the cabinet, and the draft national education policy, which was constructed by the Kasturirangan committee, because that explains many more things in detail, given that it's a much longer document. What I will do over the next, let's say, roughly 8-10 minutes, is that I will try to tie together what is this approach of the policy towards the transformation of our school education. That's what I will try and do. Right? So my comments are going to be in four parts, right? And the intent of my comments is to share with you how these four things come together, how they're integrated. They must be seen together, working together to transform school education. Now, that point, I think, is very important. And the point being, we must think of the policy in an integrated manner. We must think of it in an integrated manner. We must ensure that it is implemented and executed in an integrated manner. So now the four parts, and we must see them as working together, right? Working together. The first part is, what is the aim? What is the purpose of education? And all of you are involved with education. All of us know that depending on what the purpose of education that you aspire for, शिक्षा के उद्देश्य क्या हैं, उसके आधार पर सब कुछ अलग हो सकता है. So clearly articulating the purpose of education, which will eventually tie everything together, is important. And it is very heartening, very, very heartening that the policy is explicit, बिल्कुल साफ है कि शिक्षा के उद्देश्य जो हैं, it is to develop a good human being and a good society. And a good human being means with integrity, with honesty, with truthfulness, with commitment, with dedication, with human values, with empathy, with humaneness. Right? So to be able to think critically, to have cognitive capacities which can actually place him or her in the context of today's society. Right? So develop good human beings and develop a good society. A good society is, again, where there is equity, where there is justice, where there is peace, where people work together, right? Where there is a sense of deep community bonding. So this articulation of the purpose is, to my mind, the most important anchor. And I will just point out if the policy, if it has not done so, and that is heartening, if the policy had articulated a very narrow aim of purpose of education, very narrow, बहुत limited, सीमित अगर उसका उद्देश्य होता कि शिक्षा का उद्देश्य है नौकरियां पैदा करना, तो पूरी पॉलिसी अलग हो सकती थी, लेकिन वो ऐसा नहीं है. The aim and purpose of education, as articulated clearly, is development of good human beings and good society. And by the way, a vibrant economy is a part of good society. So clearly, the policy is aimed towards that also. But it is a part, not the only thing. So the first part of my description, which is integrated with the other three, is what is the aim, what shiksha ka uddeshya kya hai? And that is what informs, that is what energizes everything that happens in shiksha. I'll go to the second part. And the second part, and this is perhaps the easiest way to see it, is that, well, if that is the aim of education, agar ye shiksha ke uddeshya hain, how then will this happen? And as we know, in shiksha, curriculum, or what we call broadly the curricular framework and curriculum, is what really makes education happen. So what is the kind of curriculum? What are the principles of the curriculum and curricular framework, which then will have this kind of education which can develop good human beings in good society? And as I have already shared, I would encourage everybody to read the draft national education policy, not just the national education policy, because it gives a very good detailed description of this curriculum. But I will touch upon some of the highlights. Some of the highlights which come together to conduct the kind of education that will develop good human beings in good society. First, on the curriculum part. First, it re-architects the entire curricular framework and structure and approach on the basis of how children develop physically, how children develop emotionally, socially. We must remember that over the past 30, 40 years, and the last time that we had a policy is in 1986, really, which was tweaked in 1992. From then to today, there is enormous development of research in neurosciences, in child development, right? In other biological sciences, in social sciences. So on the basis of that development, the curricular structure of school education is changed to actually make it 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. What does it mean? What it means is, starting with age 3, and we used to have 10 plus 2 plus 3, but now we are talking about 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, right? So the first 5 starts at age 3. This is very important, very, very important. What it does is it's giving enormous focus, as research has suggested we must give, to early childhood education. And it integrates from age 3 onwards up to what we today call class 2 or grade 2 into the first 5 block of school education. And this is called the foundational block. And in this block, the pedagogical approach must therefore be on the basis of the kind of development that a child's brain, emotion, and social personality have. It should be play-based. It should not be something that is forcing a child to sit in one place to just remember things, right? It should be something which engages the attention of the child, right? So there's a block of the first 5 years, which starts at 3 and goes on to what we call class 2. And then you have the next 3 years, and then which is, class 3, 4, 5. And then you have the next 3 years, which is 6, 7, 8, and then 9, 10, 11, 12. I will not go into the detail, but in each of these stages, the underlying core principle is, how do we have a curricular pedagogical approach which is suitable, which is tuned to, which is resonant with, which is best suited for the developmental stage that the children are going through. So I think that's a central, absolutely central principle of the pedagogical restructuring, which will then develop the kind of curricular framework which will achieve those aims of education. The second thing that I'll talk about on the curricular approach is the importance of language. There's much written about how mother tongue, home language should be the medium of instruction. But very often this matter is being misconstrued by people who have not read the policy adequately. The policy is actually encouraging multilingualism. It is based on a very basic and simple truth, which is so established by research that it does not require any repetition, that children learn best in their mother tongue, in their home language. So the policy is saying, as far as possible, children's medium of instruction, certainly at the young age, should be the mother tongue. But at the same time, it is encouraging multilingualism, learning many languages, including English, including our own classical languages, including our existing languages which are around us, right? And that multilingualism has both a practical aspect, which is, of course, in the world of today, the more languages that you know, perhaps the more functional it is for you, but also it has a deep cognitive development aspect, which again is researched very significantly. I'll move on to the third aspect of the curricular stuff that I was talking about, and which is, and this is very important, it demolishes the hierarchy between extracurricular, curricular, and co-curricular. It demolishes the hierarchy between PCM, as we call it, and commerce and history, or languages, as we call it. What it does is it gives equal importance, on one hand, to the physical sciences, social sciences, humanities, and equal importance to art, music, to, most importantly, including vocational education. So all these different fields and disciplines of human understanding and knowledge, all children will actually go through it in an integrated manner. And I think that's a remarkable transformational difference that this policy brings forth. To make it concrete, of course, the National Curricular Framework 2021 has to be developed, as the policy says. Hopefully, that will be started very soon, and we'll have a National Curricular Framework, which then will guide us. I'll move on to the next part of the curricular stuff, which is very important, which is it focuses a lot on the matter of how to reform examinations, how to reform assessment, because all of us know, in Hindi we say that Bharat mein shiksha tantra nahi hai, pariksha tantra hai. When we say it jokingly, but it's true. We are so pariksha focused. And therefore, there is a lot of focus in the policy on how assessment, examination, boards should be changed, such that assessment, one, is formative. It is for constructive purposes. Two, it assesses the deep and the important capacities that need to be developed, not merely rote memorization. Lastly, and when I say lastly, as I mentioned before, I can't touch upon everything in this briefer time. Lastly, the curricular approach is very focused on making sure that some of the very immediate concerns are addressed, very immediate concerns. There's a lot of focus on basic literacy and numeracy. We know that one of the problems that we have is that even in class 3, 4, 5, a lot of children are not able to read, can't do basic arithmetic, right? So it addresses that. And on the other hand, it also addresses the matter of dropouts, right? So I talked about the aim of education. I talked about the curricular reform that then will enable this aim of education. I'll quickly touch upon the third and the fourth aspect, which work together to make it happen. And then I will take a pause. The third aspect is, clearly, for this kind of a curriculum to be enabled, there are some very important enablers, and the most important of which is teachers. And if you'll read the policy, and so I'm talking about enablers in my third aspect of what works together. Teachers is perhaps the most important aspect. I will hazard to say, मतलब ये risk ले सकता हूँ कहने का कि in a sense, and you must interpret what I'm saying in the limited way I'm saying it, that this policy is actually teacher-centric. So whenever I have said this, some people have said, oh, do you mean to say it is not child-centric? No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is, we cannot have a child-centric education system unless we have a teacher-centric education system. So therefore, this policy is very focused on enabling, empowering the teacher. There's a range of things for the teachers. For example, the basic service conditions. If we do not provide basic service conditions, if we have women teachers teaching in distant rural areas, and their school don't have a functioning toilet, how can we expect them to teach better? So starting from there to in-service teacher support, to making sure that adequate number of teachers are appointed, to making sure that teacher education, the B.Ed, D.Ed system, which we know is very problematic today, that is completely transformed. So there is a very, very, very significant emphasis on empowering, enabling, developing capacity of teachers, not just in theory, but actually in practice. Second, and I'm talking about the enablers. The second enabler is that the culture of the system must be that of trust and empowerment. If we are wanting a curriculum which is developing good human beings, which means humaneness, capacity to think, how can you have a culture of a system which is suspicious, which is all the time looking over your shoulder, which is always criticizing? So the second critical enabler is that the culture of the system must be transformed to be empowering, trusting, enabling. Otherwise, the aims of education that we have, to which we are developing a curriculum, that will actually not come into practice. It will remain on paper. Lastly, on the enablers, it is quite clear, absolutely clear, that even today, we have enormous inequity. Dr. Sridhar refers to the transgender groups, people with disabilities, different geographies, right? So the policy has very specific measures to actually ensure that equity happens, right? I'll point out one measure, which, it's such a line, it's a wonderful line in the policy, which is often missed because it's just one line. It specifically says that children coming from disadvantaged groups in a classroom, maybe they need a better student-teacher ratio. While the RT may talk about 30:1, but if you're wanting to pay adequate attention to students who do not have any support at home, perhaps you need a lot many more teachers, right? So from an enabler perspective, there is a very, very significant focus on ensuring equity happens to, I think, the entire set of socioeconomically disadvantaged groups that we have in our country. The fourth part, and with which I will stop, is that's the aim of education, that's the curricular transformation. Then there are enablers, teachers are at the center of that enablement. Lastly, the regulatory and the governance system, that is envisioned to be transformed to be able to support the kind of trust and the culture of empowerment that I was talking about. It's a very, very interesting, very effective architecture that is thought about in the policy. I will just allude to 2 or 3 things. One, it is being written about a lot, that it is saying there should be light and tight regulation. What does it mean? What it means is, it's very simple. Today, a lot of the regulation in India, a lot of the governance in India that we do of our education system, of our institutions, it is actually overbearing. We are trying to regulate many, many things, and we are not effective with it. Over the past 60, 70 years, we seem to have developed a system where we are trying to regulate even the smallest kind of a thing. We want to get into everything in an institution. The net result of it is we are not able to regulate anything. All this 60, 70 years of regulatory overhang that we have, that has not been able to stop the commercialization. It has neither stopped commercialization, nor had it delivered standards and quality properly. So this over-regulatory system that has been developed over 60, 70 years, that will be transformed by what is called light and tight. That means the regulation will be on a few specific things, very few specific things, not like today. For example, they will be on financial probity. They'll be on whether you're a not-for-profit organization or not, if it's a private institution, right? It will be on ensuring that there is clear and good governance of the institution, transparent and good governance. So only very few parameters will be actually regulated, but they will be regulated very tightly, which means they will be very, very tightly regulated, and it will be ensured that people adhere to those few standards. Right? The same regulatory and governance architecture, it recognizes that the entire regulatory institutional architecture perhaps needs to go through a change, and which is why it separates the functions. It separates the functions they're the agency in the public system that should run the institutions, the agency in the public system that should actually set the standards, and the agency in the public system which actually should regulate. Today, everything is done by the same agency. It separates so that it can be done better, and also there's no conflict of interest, right? Lastly, on the regulation and governance side, it envisions school complexes. Some people have expressed the fear that school complexes mean that some schools will be shut down. Nothing can be further from the truth. The idea of school complex is very, very simple. Many of us, like me, we travel to the disadvantaged rural areas of this country. We know that one of the good things that we have today is even the smallest village has a school. But many of these villages are so small. Many of these schools are so small, 15 students, 20 students, 30 students. So if you think of all these small schools, the policy is envisioning just bringing them together, not physically, in an organizational way, bringing them together in the form of a school complex, where in a particular region, in a sensible, logical region, maybe 10, 12 kilometers, all schools can work together such that better resourcing can happen. Today, one of the big problems in such areas is we can't have subject-based teachers. We can't even imagine having sports teachers and music teachers in such small schools. But if you think of 15, 20 schools together or 10 schools together, then one can say, oh, for the 10 schools together, perhaps we can have 2 sports teachers, 2 music teachers. We can certainly have subject-based teachers, right? So this matter of school complexes is another critical part of how this entire regulatory and governance structure is envisioned to enable everything else that I talked about. So I'm going to take a pause, but before I do that, a very quick recap. The school policies that are envisioned, they are truly transformational. They arise from what is the aim of education, how the curricular transformation is required to make that aim of education happen, what are the enablers, particularly teachers at the center, and lastly, the kind of regulatory and governance climate that will make all this happen. I will end by saying, and I wish people would talk about it strongly and loudly. The policy takes a very fundamental principle, which is that if that is the aim of education, we must ensure that equity happens. Equity happens because the experience and research on all education systems across the world is that if the education system focuses on equity, to delivering high quality education to the most disadvantaged child, then actually the quality of the overall system increases. And that's how the policy is designed, to make sure that equity happens, knowing that if we can make equity happen, then quality will follow. With that, I'll come to an end. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Anurag sir, for such a fruitful session. And as you said, it's really painful and cruel that even after 7 decades that India attained independence, we are still talking about equity and inclusiveness in our Indian education system. Hope the NEP 2020 solves this issue forever and ever, and will definitely bring about holistic development in the Indian education system. Thank you so much, sir. Now I request Professor K.C. Baiju, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Kerala, Kasargod, to introduce Dr. Shakila Shamsu, formerly OSD NEP, Department of Higher Education MHRD, to all of us. Over to you, sir.
Professor Baiju. Professor Baiju is doing some file work, I think so.
I will take this opportunity.
Okay, Dr. Gaurish.
To introduce. I take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu, who is the speaker for today's session. We will talk on the higher education. She is formerly OST, National Education Policy, in the Department of Higher Education, MHRD, and also the nodal officer of the flagship scheme of National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. Prior to this, she held senior positions like OST for the 12th plan in the MHRD and Joint Advisor for Education in the Planning Commission. Her academic career spanned over more than 4 decades working as lecturer in University of Mumbai, IGNO, and over 14 years of service in the Government of India. She has been the secretary of the committee to draft national education policy and played a very key role in drafting and coordinating the entire journey of policy development during the Kasturi Rangan sir policy period. So I extend a warm welcome to you, madam. Looking forward for you to talk on the revolutionary reforms in higher education through this particular policy. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Gaurish, for the kind words of introduction. At the outset, let me congratulate Karnataka State Rural Development and Panchayati Raj University and the Center for Educational and Social Studies, Bengaluru, and the team led and a number of other multiple educational institutions who have come forward to organize this national e-conclave on a very topic which is now gripping all educationists, academicians across the country and the globe, the National Education Policy 2020. I also take this opportunity to congratulate Professor M.K. Sridhar on his nomination as a member of the University Grants Commission. And I urge Professor Sridhar ji to take forward the lead of converting the regulatory system to have a Higher Education Commission of India. I thank my previous speaker, Professor Anurag Beher, for having laid the foundations of school education. And I'll come straight to the topic in the limited time, which I believe would be around 10 minutes allotted to me, to talk about the reforms that are envisioned in the NEP 2020 with regard to higher education. At the same time, I would like to place on the plate for all of you to understand what Professor Sridhar had mentioned, that the NEP 2020 is the fruit of a labor that this entire country was churning through for the last 5.5 years, and a humongous consultation that has taken place, which is possibly unparalleled in the history of the global world itself. Jocularly, I sometimes say it should try for getting entry into the Guinness World Book of Records as being one of the most participative, citizen-centric consultation that has taken place, where all cross-sections of the society were invited. If, as someone who has been associated since the inception, a 7th standard student in his handwriting has written a letter on what he would like to see the NEP look like way back in 2015 itself. That is the kind of inspiration that people had when they were asked to contribute into this very democratically worked out education policy making process. The foundational pillars, I'm sure all of us as educationists have read those 5 goals of access, equity, quality, accountability, and affordability. And it's not a rhetoric, but it is actually a fact that the NEP 2020 looks at education as one single continuum, starting from the early childcare education and moving on to the other verticals of school education, higher education, technical education, professional education, adult education, and vocational education, in a manner that there is an interconnectedness between all these verticals and based itself on certain core principles. And that's why I would urge each one of you, rather than reading the NEP 2020 from the point of view of school education or higher education or professional, read the introductory chapter, which outlines the foundational principles of flexibility, of multidisciplinarity, of promoting the creative and cognitive learning of children, of making it teacher-centric as well as child-centered education, looking at education as a public service, which has been very well outlined in the principles of this policy to realize the goals of access, equity, quality, accountability, and affordability. Without much ado, I would like to go into what has been the transformative changes envisioned in NEP 2020 with regard to higher education. It accepts that higher education is actually a continuation of the school education, and therefore there should be linkages to the school education. And that is why the point that Dr. Anurag had mentioned, that you do away with the silo-based education at school level itself, so that you look at education being for the holistic development of the individual. And I must underline at this stage that I'm happy that the 4 pillars of learning to know, to learning to do, to learning to live together, and learning to be of the Delors Commission was referred to in the introductory remarks. As much as India is a signatory to the United Nations development goals and committed to the sustainable development goals to promote lifelong learning. And it is this underlying principles in the Global Committee of Nations and in a highly globally connected society that the NEP 2020 comes out as the first policy of the 21st century. And we need to understand why this policy has to have distinguishing features and the rationale for some of the recommendations that have been made. Because earlier policies of which we have been beneficiaries, whether it is the Radhakrishnan Commission policy, or it is the 68 policy, or it is the 86 policy, we who are assembled here with our gray hair, most of us have been beneficiaries of that education policy. But that education policy has possibly outlived its purpose, and therefore the need for looking at the requirements of the 21st century and to look at a society which is so very globally interconnected, where technology has not only been a disruptor, but has been the catalyst for a lot of changes, where our youth, our students, we have, as we claim, the youngest population in the world today, and we're looking at a demographic window which can be converted to an advantage if you have the right kind of education, skills, and knowledge that is to be provided. It is in this scenario that we are talking about heightened emphasis on research and innovation, heightened emphasis on bringing back the centrality of teacher education, heightened emphasis on the autonomy of higher education institutions and empowering them with independent governance, as well as the key stakeholder, namely the student, to provide them optimal learning environments. If all this has to be achieved as what we would like to see India in the Global Committee of Nations as becoming a leader, as becoming a driver of change, as becoming one which would be recognized as the powerhouse of knowledge that it once commanded in its civilizational history, then we need to have an education system that will meet the needs of 21st century. Accordingly, we have said that in higher education, we claim to have one of the largest higher education systems in the world. As we speak, we are something like around 1,028 universities, some 1,000 odd colleges, some 15 to 20,000 or maybe even 30,000 standalone institutions. But having this plethora of institutions, have they added to the complexity or have they delivered better? Rather, as a committee and as an exercise that was undertaken, from all the stakeholder feedback, they said that there must be some degree of rationalization. And therefore, this whole idea of institutional restructuring, not from the point of view of the nomenclature, whether it's a central university or a state university or a deemed university or a private university or a unitary university or an affiliating university and so on. From the point of view of the purpose that we would largely focus on. And therefore, we have said that a number of higher education institutions might like to become research-intensive universities. Now, Professor Anurag had mentioned that he has urged us to read the DNEP 2019, which is the committee's report, vis-a-vis the NEP 2020. And here is where the change is. As far as the DNEP 2019 was concerned, we talked about type 1 or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, which based on public feedback, we modified in the NEP 2020 to read as 3 other categorizations, which are not in watertight compartments, but which can be research-intensive universities, teaching-intensive universities, and autonomous degree-granting colleges. So the restructuring of the higher education institutions in the coming 10 to 15 years, we hope would be where institutions understand their own core strengths and make their own identity as whether they would like to aspire to become research-intensive universities with a modicum of teaching or become largely teaching universities with some element of research. And the last structure that we are talking about, because we have about 40,000 colleges, can we have and can we move by rationalizing the affiliation system and phasing out affiliation system, which we think has been the bane of higher education, to become autonomous degree granting colleges. And this particular point of phasing out the affiliation system has come in for a lot of misgivings, which I think I'll use this opportunity, which is being attended by almost about 500 plus people, to say that we are not stopping the affiliation system tomorrow. And we are not saying that colleges would be shut down. We are only saying that all colleges should meet certain quality benchmarks, and for which there will be hand-holding done by the host university and a number of other agencies who would try to mentor these institutions to reach certain accreditation benchmarks. Having acquired that, having acquired a certain benchmark of accreditation, then go on to get graded autonomy, not full-fledged autonomy also. So it's going to be a very slow evolving process, but we are empowering colleges also to become degree granting autonomous colleges. So we're looking at something like 2035, not tomorrow, that we will have a scenario of educational higher education institutions in India, which would be largely research universities, teaching intensive universities, and autonomous degree granting colleges. Now, the undergraduate program itself, which we currently offer, where we are putting students as BA, BCom, BSc, BTech, BArch, agriculture, medicine, so on. Knowledge itself, Professor Yashpal has mentioned way back that knowledge is porous, and therefore it has to be interdisciplinary, it has to be transdisciplinary, it has to be multidisciplinary. Because we have recognized that what goes to make an individual is not just the knowledge of one particular discipline alone, but a combination of very large number of disciplines. I may have interest in music, sports, in pottery, in medicine, in agriculture. An individual's unique potential is much more than just the silo-based education which is currently being offered. And therefore, we have talked of moving towards multidisciplinary, holistic education, where every student would be given a wide set of choices, flexibility to choose from a wide set of choices, and take up these courses so that the student can finally decide whether the person would like to major in more than one discipline. That opportunity is being provided. The person can major in more than one discipline, and it could be in any field, ranging from social sciences to applied sciences, to liberal, to maybe languages or humanities or performing arts or sports or vocation and so on. This idea is not translatable very easily. The simple reason is we have very few multidisciplinary universities today. How will then you make this a reality? We therefore evolved this idea of having an academic bank of credit, which is highly individualized and customized to every student. And that student can take up these courses from other universities. And also, the mode of learning need not be face-to-face. It can also be through online, MOOCs, or distance education, and through open universities. So we have given flexibility in the choice of courses, from where the student can learn it, the mode of learning it, and finally, the entry and exit has also been made flexible by allowing them, if they want to leave at first year, to get a certificate, leave at second year, get a diploma, leave at third year, get a bachelor's degree, and leave at 4 year, you get a bachelor's degree in multidisciplinary education. And therefore, the master's can be either 1 year or 2 year. And we have also visualized an integrated PhD program. So we have, as far as the undergraduate education, brought about a significant transformation, making the student as the center in arriving at the decisions and allowing that student to change course without being asked to be cast in stone for a course that he or she may have taken, but wants to change as the course evolves. And in keeping with the spirit of lifelong learning, allowing students to join at time, maybe leaving it and rejoining it as we talk about lifelong learning. In that spirit, we are talking about strengthening open and distance learning. Today, because of COVID, we have all moved towards online education without much student preparedness, teacher preparedness, and institutional preparedness. Technology is here to stay, and COVID has possibly accelerated that progress. Open and distance learning is almost a reality. It has been a reality, but we need to ensure that the standards and quality of open and distance learning come up to the levels that we think are there in normal classroom transaction. I have my own reservations about how I look at it, coming from an ODL system, but we need to ensure that all ODL systems maintain certain quality benchmarks and move towards virtual learning, remote learning, fully online courses, and allow students to actually take the benefit of very good online courses, both as part of the embedded curricula itself or maybe as supplementary as per the needs for skilling and reskilling. Talking about skilling and reskilling, a point that Anuragji had mentioned, that vocational education has been embedded into mainstream education, and the apprehension that in the introductory remarks was mentioned, that the learning to know and the learning to do should not result in a divide between the have and the have-nots, which is what the TSR Subramaniam Committee's report came in for a lot of criticism, was that in this policy, by embedding vocational education as mainstream education, we hope that this divide that is there in our mind would not result in the have-nots going in for skilling and the elitist group going in for knowledge education. We are saying that knowledge and skills go together as much as aptitudes go together. And what is the focus of higher education is on giving them the 21st century skills, like Professor Sridharji had mentioned right at the beginning, of critical thinking, of cognitive abilities, of collaboration and communication, because as I normally say, we have the luxury of being in a particular profession for decades. Our children and our grandchildren will not have that, because thanks to artificial intelligence and big data and 3D and so on, the kind of jobs that may be coming about are something that we cannot even foresee. So if we give them the kind of ability to choose with a multiplicity of courses, as well as the right kind of 21st century skills, I'm sure we are actually doing a great service to the learners to meet with the challenges of the 21st century, which is so dynamic, where the obsolescence of knowledge is so much a reality that they can equip themselves for a new kind or a new age that we have not been a part of. On the aspect of optimal learning environments, we have said that the flexibility should also have adequate student support from academic support point of view in terms of counseling, as well as psychological counseling that may be needed. Stress is a reality, and inability to cope in a highly isolated world using technology-based education is something that we need to address. Similarly, the diversity of student population coming into higher education, which has become more and more aspirational with first generational learners, children who are not familiar with languages, and therefore the recommendation that higher education can also be offered in regional languages rather than the imposition of English. These are all aimed at trying to provide an enabling educational environment where students can flourish, where students' talent and potential come together, as well as their emotional and financial needs in terms of enhanced scholarships are provided in higher education. A substantial effort has been made in chapter 14 on equity and inclusion in higher education. And due to the paucity of time, I would only try to mention, we are talking about special education zones, looking at the children's needs, students' needs with different disabilities, including learning disabilities, gender inclusion fund, and so on. These are some of the measures with a large number of scholarships to be offered both by public institutions and by private institutions. I think I try to talk about internationalization a little bit, because I can see that in your chat box, many queries are coming on the allowing foreign universities to open campuses over here will actually demotivate institutions. No, my dear, I think competition is the reality of the day. The more you become competitive by exposure to foreign universities coming here, the more you give a level playing field for those who cannot afford to send their children outside the country, and allowing foreign universities to set up campuses here, you are actually helping the Indian education system to reach global benchmarks. Ultimately, we cannot afford to ignore the fact that global rankings are very critical, and global rankings are important. For that, you should have faculty mobility, student mobility, and institutional mobility. And in that spirit, we have tried to promote internationalization. The NRF is one of the landmark changes that we are bringing about. And on this also, there are a lot of misgivings. I've heard comments in the media saying that will my PhD topic be decided by NRF? No, let's not understand it like that. NRF is only an umbrella architecture being created to bring about and catalyze all research under one large umbrella body, while allowing the existing research institutions to continue to do that. But the most important thing is it has opened up the areas of research with not just focus on science and technology, but on social sciences, languages, Indian knowledge systems, and many other aspects which have somehow got reduced in importance. And the interconnectedness and the interdisciplinary nature of these researches will be facilitated by NRF, which will have a larger core of funding, as well as the critical point that state universities, which have largely been teaching universities and not been able to nurture research, NRF is expected to seed, nurture, and grow research taking place in state universities. I will not talk on the regulatory system, except to say what Anuragji said, that the higher education regulatory bodies are also based on the simple principle of separation of powers of funding, of accreditation, of academic standard setting, and of regulation. And all this would come under a Higher Education Commission of India with 4 independent verticals, so that due justice is given to each of these functions without having a conflict of roles, and allowing an independence between these 4 for the improvement of the higher education system in a light but tight regulation, with the idea of trying to empower educational institutions. And in that same spirit, as far as higher education institutions are concerned, we are talking about making them highly autonomous with independent governing boards, with board of governors being without external interference, as we have explicitly stated, without external interference, and having an eminent set of educationists to drive that to reach the goals of what that university would like to achieve. And for that, the institutional development plans become very critical in deciding what would be the trajectory of that higher education institution. So overall, the policy has been on trying to say that the basic principle as far as finance is concerned, that education is a public good, it remains a social good, but public and private will move together. And the aim is to create a much open system of education suited to the 21st century needs, where we are empowering the students. Yes, on the faculty, I must say in higher education, we have talked about the career growth of faculty. We have talked about methods of faculty accountability, tenure track system, an extended tenure track system. But at the same time, saying that there will be adequate opportunities for capacity building and professional development, going on to hold positions of academic leadership. And this part has also been emphasized for energizing and motivating the faculty who is starting with a position of assistant professor to tomorrow aspire to become the vice chancellor of the university, but at the same time ensuring that they are equally responsible and accountable for the learning outcomes of students coming out of the higher education system. So overall, the policy has been aiming at empowering students, teachers, higher educational institutions, while recognizing the role of parents, other stakeholders in carrying these forward. And at the end, I would say that it respects the federal structure of this country and says that the center and the state, to a much strengthened body of the Central Advisory Board on Education, will come together in a coordinated and cooperative manner to implement the National Education Policy 2020. Thank you for giving me a patient hearing.
Thank you, Shakila ma'am, for such an insightful session. And as you said, we are the products of previous education policies. But 21st century India needs something more holistic approach in the education system. In this spirit, NEP 2020, once implemented, will definitely lay a foundation stone of new India, 21st century. It will definitely stir a revolution and will transform the higher education system. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now we have this Professor Katimani, sir. A very warm welcome to you, sir. I now request Dr. Anup K. Singh, Director General, Nirma University, Ahmedabad, to introduce Dr. T.V. Katimani, sir, to all of us.
My pleasure to introduce Professor T.V. Katimani, who is a very distinguished personality. He is a renowned critic, poet, translator, as well as a versatile thinker and seasoned administrator. With more than 20 books and over 100 articles and papers to his credit, Professor Katimani has been a recipient of both state and national level awards and recognitions. Very importantly, he served as the Vice Chancellor of Indira Gandhi National Tribal University, Amarkantak, Madhya Pradesh. Now I request Professor Katimani to share his thoughts on equity and inclusiveness.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Anupji. Namaskar. Vice Chancellor, Professor Vishnukant Chattapalli, Professor Sridhar, my colleagues, Dr. Anurag Beher, Professor Shakila, Registrar Basuraj Lakandavar, and my dear colleagues and friends. I congratulate the university and the Vice Chancellor to conduct such an important webinar on NEP. The whole country is talking about, discussing about, debating about national education policy, especially the primary education. Everybody is very happy that they are, publishing in. I am looking in Karnataka, in Kannada, talking, debating in webinars that yes, primary education has made more flexible, more lively by introducing skills, by introducing the textbooks should be full of Indian ethos, values, and villages, about villages, this, that. This is only because of our, very enthusiastic members and the input given by the society. Now, the university has asked me to talk about especially equity and inclusion in NEP, especially primary education and higher education. Equity and inclusion is the most important part of our constitution. Constitution, says about, speaking about how education should be given to all, how powers, how authorities should be given to people to lead their life, to learn this, that. Here in education, national education policy, there is a special chapter regarding equity and inclusion in education, school education, as well as higher education. As you know, NEP speaks about the open of possibilities that can lift both individuals as well as communities out of the cycles of disadvantage. I'm so happy. In fact, usually we will speak about reservation, this much of percentage, this much of percentage to this category, that category. No, that is not the point. It will be there. That percentage will be there, but open of possibilities that can lift both individuals as well as communities out of the cycles of disadvantage. Why a particular community needs reservation? Because of the facing of the community, disadvantages. Now, NEP speaks about open up possibilities to curtail the disadvantages, making equality a phenomenon of the center. Equality is part along with from birth, from entering into school, from entering into higher education. There is no inequality. Always equality will prevail. So NEP called these groups SCs, STs, women, transgender, geographical barriers as socio-economically disadvantaged groups. It is called as socio-economically disadvantaged groups. It is SEDGs. The dynamics and also many reasons for exclusion of SEDGs from the education system are common across school and higher education sectors also. I mean, the students in primary education, which they are facing with the problems, the same problems will be faced by in the higher education, MA students, PhD students, and research scholars. For example, there are two issues, that is common poverty is a common phenomenon, and inaccessibility also. NEP approach to equity and inclusion are as I earlier said, also common across school and higher education. Furthermore, there must be continuing across the stages to ensure sustainable reform. Matlab, it means that no, this is the last point. No, that is not there. It is continuous. Ensure sustainable reform. Go on changing. NEP speaks about certain facets of exclusion, which are more intense in higher education. To address that, NEP speaks about to include lack of knowledge of higher education opportunities in rural area, tribal area, hilly area. Students doesn't know about the opportunities in higher education that we have to include. And second one, economic opportunities. Cost of pursuing higher education may be a little more. Financial constraints. And admission processes, many times the students from rural background, the students from poor background, the students from unfortunate background doesn't know about what is the process of the processes of admission, which I have seen, and my university in Amarkantak, Madhya Pradesh is successful to curtail these problems of admissions, processes in admissions. We have created awareness among the tribes, awareness among the women folk, awareness among the rural folk, and we have started training centers in high schools, primary schools, at their own level, at their own language. Now the process involvement of admissions of local people, tribal people is very much improved. Geographical and language barriers also. Professor Shekila told about language barriers. Language is the most important factor. Everybody even speaks about importance of English. Definitely, the importance of English is always regarded. But we must know the importance of local languages also equally important. To include local languages, tribal languages, mother tongue in the primary education as well as higher education. NEP is for that. NEP speaks about up to 5th standard mother tongue education should be given, and even afterwards also, even higher education also, institutions should try to give access to students in their own mother tongue. Even research can be done. Even higher education classes can be done. It's possible. NEP. It's the opinion of the NEP. And why poor employability is there? What is the reason? What may be the reason, and how we can go for it? NEP has proposed this potential of many higher education programs and lack of appropriate student support mechanisms. Many times the unfortunate students from unfortunate groups doesn't know about what are the important subjects in the our course. The potential of many higher education programs, the institution must be able to able to convince the students, don't take this, you can go for this because you have sufficient knowledge in this thing. For example, I would like to tell you, tell the house, there is one tribe in central India, very specific tribe, Baiga. Yeah, Baiga, who has no certificate, I mean, unpad, we can say, illiterate, knows more than, knows about medicinal value of trees, medicinal value of creepers than a botanical scientist. This is how his knowledge, Baiga's knowledge, botanical knowledge, medicinal knowledge, how it can be utilized by the educational system. It is the first point. By introducing local language, these students excel in their own subject. They have wonderful knowledge system along with their own DNA. But the problem with English or any another language, foreign language in their own area, they could not do anything. The NEP has proposed language barrier can easily overcome. Additional actions NEP has proposed, steps to be taken by government of Karnataka, state governments as well as government of India. Earmark suitable government funds for the education of SEDGs. Set clear targets of higher education. I mean, to improve GER for socio-economically disadvantaged groups. Enhance gender balance in admissions to HEs. Enhance establishment of high quality higher educational institutions in aspirational districts. As you all know, we have the government of India has identified around 115 aspirational districts in the whole country. They are in 28 states. NEP has taken the account of aspirational states, aspirational districts, and established, we have, the government has to establish high quality higher education institutions in these 115 districts. Special education zones, which certainly more number of SEDGs. Higher education institutions can teach in local Indian languages, bilingual too. Scholarships to SEDGs in both public and private also. Till now, scholarships and fellowships to the students who are studying in government schools, private government colleges, government institutions only were eligible to receive fellowships and scholarships. Now, NEP has opened a large number of students from these groups are studying in private institutions too. They should be extended this fellowship and economic facilities. This is the opinion of NEP. Outreach programs on higher education opportunities and fellowships to SEDGs. Develop and support technology tools for better participation and learning outcomes of these groups. NEP has suggested steps to be taken by all higher education institutions, mitigate opportunity costs and fees for pursuing higher education. Financial assistance and fellowships to these groups. Conduct of outreach opportunities and fellowships, scholarships. More inclusive admission process. In this para, more inclusive admission processes, a thesis can be written how NEP has given scope for inclusivity and to support these unfortunate groups. Conduct of sorry, make curriculum more inclusive. This is most important factor. Curriculum needs more inclusivity. How is that curriculum can be more inclusive? Curriculum will become inclusive by introducing local theories, local opportunities, the persons from local area who has done marvelous job, and the best practices, the best persons, the best examples of the locality definitely can attract the attention of the students. At the same time, the inclusivity can bring by introducing the life of downtrodden people, tribal people into textbooks. Increase employability, employable potentiality in higher education institutions. Develop degree courses in Indian languages and bilingual, as I already told you. Buildings and facilities must be wheelchair accessible and disabled friendly. This is a most important issue. Only one building or one facility should not be done. All buildings should have such facilities, wheelchair accessibility, washrooms for these particular people. Bridge courses for students that come from disadvantaged educational background. Disadvantaged educational background has a big theory. NEP has taken the account, and we, the educational administrator, should take care of this disadvantaged educational groups, and we have to take care of courses should be according to their abilities and capabilities. Socio-emotional and academic support and mentoring all such students through suitable counseling also. Counseling is necessary for the students from rural background, from disadvantaged backgrounds, and HECs should take care of counseling also. Mentoring programs such as sensitization of faculty, counselors, and students on gender identity issues. You want to include this gender identity in curriculum too. This is the most important recommendation from NEP, that gender sensitization should not be extracurricular syllabus. It should include in the core group of syllabus only. Enforce no discrimination and anti-harassment rules. And develop institutional development plans that contain specific plans for action on increasing participation from SEDGs. It means, we have to support, attract the SEDG groups, students to come to universities, to come to research institutes, to come to IITs, to come to colleges, by making our gates open to everybody, more attractive to these unadvantaged, disadvantaged groups. With these few words, I will complete my topic. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk about equity and increasing facilities to the students of SEDG groups. Thank you very much. Good day.
Thank you very much, sir.
Ernie, you can extend up to maximum 15 minutes.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, Katimani sir, for such a informative session. Seriously, it brings very much happiness to know that NEP 2020 has not only focused on equity and inclusiveness based on social, economic, and other factors, but also it is based upon the curriculum also. It is very, it brings really more happiness. Now over to Soumya Prashant ma'am for the Q&A session. Soumya ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a question for Anurag Banerjee. Sir, there is a question from Chandrika. She is a principal from the law college, and she wants to know that as NEP policy states that till 5th standard, the teaching will be the mother tongue. And we can't compel the teachers as well, the parents and the children to choose the languages prescribed by the state, and how this issue will be resolved without violation of the child rights, that is the freedom of speech and expression. Over to you, sir.
Anuragji. Yes.
Yeah. I think this matter of the medium of instruction has been much talked about, much written about. I think it's important that we understand this whole matter at the very fundamental and basic level. First, and this is very important, the research is over the past 30, 40 years across the world, across all languages, India, outside. It is completely, totally unambiguous. Bilkul saaf hai ye baat. It's totally clear that children learn best, easiest, with the deepest understanding in their mother tongue, the home language that they're used to. And it is while research is there, common sense also will tell you that, right? Because if you use the mother tongue of the child when she comes into the class, then it is possible to use all the resources, all the understanding that the child has developed by the time she reaches the class. It's not as though children don't know language. They know language. It's a question of how do you bridge from the language that they know and they use all the time to literacy. And therefore, it is only natural that the mother tongue is the best, by far the best suited for learning literacy. And it's quite clear from research. So the policy says, as far as possible, right? It's not dictating that it must be exactly like that. As far as possible, mother tongue should be used. That's one, right? So both the elements here, one, that what is most effective is mother tongue. And two, the policy is not dictating. The policy is not saying you must do it like this. It's not saying that. As far as possible. Now, why is that as far as possible there? Because there are other considerations that come into play. Some of the considerations, I mean, that was not there in the question, but some of the more real examples also are that we have a lot of migrants who go from one part of the country to the other part of the country, and where the child's home language might be Bengali, but she is actually in Rajasthan. Now, what will we do? So the as far as possible is actually now, therefore, really responding to the contextual reality of wherever that school is, both demographic reality, social reality, and aspirational reality. I will end the response with what I stated earlier, that, you know, in a sense, the even more important thing the policy is doing is what it's saying is that at that young age, not just mother tongue is important for learning literacy, but also at that young age, children learn languages best. So they should be learning, they should be taught multiple languages, because that enables subsequent life in very many ways and actually enables cognitive development. So I would summarize by saying, one, research is clear, mother tongue is best for literacy. Two, the policy is not forcing anybody. It's saying as far as possible because it responds to the educational reality of mother tongue being the best. And third, it's also quite clear that multilingualism must be encouraged.
Thank you, sir. There is one question for Dr. M.K. Sridhar, sir. The question is from T.V. Govindraju. He is supposed to ask that earlier NEPs had a lot of valuable points, as well as the education reformation was good, but it failed during its implementation stage. So this is going to happen even in the case of NEP 2020. And he also wants to know that what are the challenges that they are going to face in the implementation stage?
Thank you, Dr. Govindra, for having voiced all our concern. Because I was also just telling some people, after this NEP was accepted by the Union Cabinet, that I was getting a lot of requests, you come here, you address and all that. And now I started telling of late, discussion is over. I think it is time for implementation. So I'm focusing my time on implementation. That's what I said. It reflects that spirit. Dr. Govindaraj is very right. You know, any good policy as a policy is extremely good. But what happens is very, very important. Let me recollect one sentence, reproduce one sentence from what our Prime Minister Modi ji addressed the other day. एक कागज पर एक नीति अच्छा है, ये जमीन पर आना चाहिए. He very clearly made this point, and he very clearly said that I have the political will to implement the policy. And this is what I am seeing in many of the states. So one positive thing for this entire policy is the political leadership has actually pitched in for implementation. That is one. Secondly, in addition to the government, what the society does is also very important. Because the institution, teacher, student, and management, how they are going to manage the change in their institution is also very, very critical. So the challenges I am seeing for implementation is twofold. One is the political leadership, political will. The other one is change of mindset among all the concerned. I think from my indication in the last 10 days, it is too early to say, but still my feel is that we are performing well on that front. I also request Dr. Govindaraju and people like that to join hands with CES and other organizations to see that implementation also succeeds. So it is all our responsibility also. But at the same time, I fully endorse his point, his concern.
Thank you, sir, for clearing the doubts. And we have a question for Dr. T.V. Katimani, sir. And there is a question, sir. Earlier, the preschooling system was not there. That is from 3 years to 6 years age group. Now, as this new economic policy has made it mandatory, because of this, is the poor family is going to bear the burden, and is India is ready to give the infrastructure to nearly 1,000, that is 160 million children. Is India is going to ready to give the infrastructure to such a huge children if we start the preschooling education in India? Over to you, sir. Katimani,
Thank you. In fact, by introducing this pre-primary school sector into the fetch of the education, primary education, the domain which is mostly benefited is a rural domain and poor people, because they will not be able to send their children to good pre-primary schools, and it's not possible from them to feed, and it's not possible from them to afford such fees. Now government has taken care of, NEP has suggested, and government has taken care of this segment. And by not only it is a pre-primary school, it is breakfast will be given, working lunch will be given, ayas will be taking care of the children. The people who are, for example, working ladies, for example, ladies who are working as a land laborer in the villages, they can send their children and go for their work also. So this recommendation of NEP is going to help the poor people of India, disadvantaged groups, and women folk at a large. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. MK Sridhar Sirji, there is a question is 6% of the GDP would be sufficient to achieve the goal or the promises stated by the policy by 2030?
See, one thing is the policy as well as our draft report has emphasized 2-3 important principles. How much is sufficient, how much is not sufficient, it is a question. But you know, what is very important is how much we are spending must also be effectively utilized. That's also a very important thing. And it must be utilized for the purpose. And in fact, our chairman, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, while writing his own preface to the draft policy, draft report, he said, it looks, that 6% looks very inadequate. But the question is, India growth, it will go up to 5 trillion. And then after a few more years, it will reach 10 trillion. You should also work out 6% of 5 trillion, 6% of 10 trillion kind of an approach. That is one thing. And secondly, we also have said, whatever additional funds that are given, what should be the priority? That we have very clearly said. So I feel this is not a case, I'm not saying, that it should not increase. But instead of only talking about it is not enough, it is not enough, it is not enough. But then I think we need to change the strategy. How do we use the additional funds? And how are we going to get more is also a question.
Thank you, sir. There is one question that if teacher is very efficient and she is able to manage the students in an effective way and she is going to provide a justice, but if she doesn't have the B.Ed degree, what would be her fate? So, I think Anurag sir can answer this.
Even Dr. Shakila can also do it. Dr. Shakila. Anurag
Yes.
can do it.
Shakila ma'am?
Let Anurag answer it. If there is something I can supplement.
Well, I think
good combination.
So I think Shakila ji had mentioned when she was speaking that one of the most important things about the policy is how it addresses the entire teacher education sector. It confronts squarely the reality of the teacher education sector. And what it does is it moves the BA to multidisciplinary institutions, converts it to a 4-year integrated BA, BEd, BSc, BEd, and that would be the default option. Only those institutions that will run a 4-year BA, BEd or a BSc, BEd, they can also provide a 2-year BEd. Other institutions cannot. So, and it is not saying that this will happen overnight. I mean, as Shakila ji said, it's a slow process. So there's a fundamental shift and transformation. So that's one part, and one should remember that that's the most critical aspect. Second is this, that it is quite clear also that the current teachers, the existing teachers, should have the opportunity to have requisite training and qualifications. And that's not necessarily very new. I mean, it's been there for the past, since the RTE has been passed, that the teachers who are there and who may not have the requisite qualifications, they should have the opportunity to go through the requisite qualifications. So it's basically balancing the importance of making sure that there's good and adequate teacher training and teacher education on one hand, and on the other hand, also making sure
that people who are already in the system, they are fairly treated and adequately.
Thank you, sir. I request
Shakila ma'am, you have to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just supplement what is being said, and I would like all who are attending this to understand that teachers, whether they are in school education, from early childcare education or higher education, the discipline of teacher education has got its right place in this NEP 2020 by placing it within the domain of higher education. It's been a long-standing demand that it is higher education system that prepares teachers for different levels. To the specific point that that had come from the participant, you see, every particular profession, and if you call teaching as a profession, would require a minimum set of qualifications. And irrespective of the fact that a particular teacher may not possess a qualification, but is delivering well in the class, it is incumbent on that particular teacher to also acquire the right kind of professional qualifications needed for that. Because you cannot sustain for a very long time in a system. You may be recognized for a year or two, and it will be acceptable to the institution also, but it becomes incumbent on the teacher as being committed to the profession. And most of us take up teaching because it's our first love. At least I am a teacher because of my passion for teaching. And most of us take up teaching, and I don't go by the dictum that those who didn't get jobs become teachers. I condemn that kind of an argument altogether. So as a teacher, we have a responsibility to the society to ensure that we possess the right kind of qualifications. And the teacher education, we didn't have time to talk about it much, but it has also undergone a lot of transformation by putting it in the 4-year multidisciplinary program. So I'd urge each one of us to look at the policy from what Professor Sridharji was mentioning. What is it that I can do my little bit to make it ensure that it can be effectively implemented? And I think as teachers who are the primary stakeholders, as institutions, there was a question in your chat box, how can higher education institutions achieve excellence? And I'm exceeding my brief in the question that was being asked to answer that panelist, that teachers, students should start preparing development plans on how to take forward the policy as much as the institutional development plan. And I thank you for actually putting this question across.
Thank you, ma'am. There is one more question towards you, ma'am. How can we promote privatization and not the commercialization of higher education?
So the role of the private sector in education, whether it is in play schools, whether it is in school education, whether it is in higher and technical education or professional education, all of us are aware is very, very large. The policy has recognized and appreciated the role of the private sector insofar as it provides better education to the students. What we are concerned at the policy is that privatization is not equal to commercialization. To put it that way would be very, very fallacious and wrong. And that is why we have said the profits that are earned by the private institutions can be used for inclusion in terms of providing enhanced scholarships to children. We have said up to 25 to 50%. We have even said complete waiver of the fees in case of meritorious students. No child should be left behind for want of means to study. And private institutions have to be committed to that goal of trying to provide free education to those who are meritorious. And you see that a number of private universities are doing that. Encouraging the private sector investment in education does not mean that we are encouraging commercialization. And it is like what Anuragji has mentioned, let us remove that distrust and suspicion that we have of the private sector. The private sector also have people who are committed to the cause of education and ensuring equitable access to education. The important thing is the regulatory system should be able to penalize, shut down those institutions which prove themselves to be commercial enterprises. And the new structure that we are talking about, where we have treated public and private on the same footing, with the principle that education remains a public good, with enhanced scholarships and freeships, and with the power to penalize and shut down private players who are not following the rules and regulations of the principle of education not being commercialized by our entire subsection on curbing commercialization is what is the spirit behind this policy. So we will encourage private sector, but will prevent commercialization. That's what the policy stands for.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Hari Singh, he has a question for Sridhar sir. He wants to know which is the link language, and does the English still dominate? And in three languages formula, where does the English language stand? So this is the question for Dr. Sridhar sir.
Yeah, I think all those who are familiar with three language formula, they're aware that Schedule 8 of the Constitution has recognized 22 languages. And that 22 languages includes English also. Primarily, they are Indian languages. And now there is inclusion of English also. So three language formula means any three of the 22 languages. It works out. It depends, how the state brings it and things like that. So therefore, three language compulsory does not involve English, but three languages among the 22 languages specified in Schedule 8. But it depends on the state policy and the local conditions.
Thank you, sir. There is a question for Anurag sir. Sir, is the state syllabus, the CBSE and ICSE will be continued, or it will be a common syllabus as per the NCERT?
Right. So I'll use that question to sort of emphasize a few basic points of principle. One is this, that as I mentioned earlier, and many of the speakers have mentioned, the entire approach of the policy is that of empowerment, right? Also being able to respond to the context, which is very, very often very local. Now, with that culture that is being developed, being built, it's also important to therefore recognize that actually the development of the curriculum is of a kind where the empowerment is actually right up to the school, not just state. It's actually up to the school. Now, it's possible that there might be right now very few schools that can develop their own curriculum, and therefore they will actually depend on the curriculum that is developed by the state or some other agency. But as an approach, as a philosophy, as a principle, even the matter of curriculum is empowering right up to the school. And that's very, very important. Now, let me mention two critical things with this. However, while the schools themselves are empowered for development of curriculum, however, how do you bind the country together? How do we make sure that there's a certain kind of adequate commonality and common framework? And that's why the NCERT, led by the NCERT, the National Curricular Framework, and please mind that phrase, it is a National Curricular Framework. It is not the National Curriculum. National Curricular Framework 2021 will be developed. We already have a National Curricular Framework, NCF 2005. This curricular framework will therefore be some kind of a guide to the development of state curricular frameworks and the state curriculum, right? So, by the architecture of having the national curricular framework and then having the state curricular framework and the state curriculum, what will happen is you're able to respond to local realities. However, there's still a commonality across the country. And when schools, they have the capacity to develop themselves curriculum, they should be developing curriculum themselves, so long as it maps to, so long as it is within the state curricular framework and the national curricular framework, right? I hope that clarifies. To me, that's a very, very important part of the policy. On one hand, empowering the schools right up to developing curriculum, but making sure that there's a commonality through the national curricular framework and the state curriculum.
Okay. Any other questions, Soumya? Hello.
She has muted her audio, sir.
So one last question, sir.
Okay. After last question, Dharni can take it.
Sure.
Yeah. Sir, how will the teacher training be affected based on the multilingual demands based on them? And if teacher is given all kinds of work, there is a chance that the teacher will dilute the concentration of the teaching aspect. So how can the teacher can handle the multilingual demands? I think Sridhar sir can answer this question.
Better is Anurag.
Better is Anurag. Anurag ji.
Yes. So that question has very many important parts. I'll just take them one by one. One, the policy is absolutely and explicitly clear that teachers should not be taken away from their core work. It's very, very clear. Like much else has been discussed, it has to be implemented. But the policy makes a very strong affirmation that this whole practice of taking teachers away from the classroom and the school for various kinds of purposes, that will not happen. There might be some important national purposes like during the general election, that might be permissible. In fact, the Supreme Court ruling also talks about that. But otherwise, teachers must remain focused on their teaching. One. Second, if you read through the text carefully, you'll also see that that's why the policy is talking about appointment of many teachers. The policy is not expecting, that the same teacher will be able to teach in 3 different languages. That's an unreal expectation. So there is therefore a clear and explicit direction that teachers should be appointed in multiple languages. Of course, there's a practicality to it, which is you can't, like Dr. Sridhar said, if we have 22 languages in our Schedule 8, it is not as though the same school or even the same school complex can have teachers for all 22 languages. So the state will have to think through the language policy it has. And based on the language policy of the state, and by the way, the language policy of the state might recognize regional differences also. So depending on the state's policy on the language, which will be implemented in the schools, then adequate appointment of teachers should be made, right? I will end with a very important point in this matter, which is teachers, wherever they are, they will be encouraged to at least have a working understanding and knowledge of the local language. And that's very important, very, very important, that teachers who are placed in, let's say, Northeast Karnataka must have a reasonable understanding of the language being used there, which might be slightly different from Dakshin Kannada, right? And which is why, and that you see, when I started speaking, when I made my first statement, I said this policy must be looked at in a comprehensive and integrated manner. And that's why it says that to be able to encourage the learning of the local language, not perfectly, but somewhat, because then they can use it with young children. Teacher transfer should not happen so frequently, right? It's not as though the teacher should be trying to change every year, right? So all of this is together. I think it's a very, very important question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As we have time constraint, the remaining question will be answered through email. Over to you, ma'am. Dhanima.
Thank you, Soumya, ma'am. Now I request Wing Commander Raghunath, sir, Vice President SES, to give away the closing remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dharani. I'm coming as a guest artist at the last minute. Nevertheless, we just put across what has been highlighted by various speakers, starting with everybody's guru, Professor M.K. Sridhar. He very succinctly put across what is the basic objective of this particular NEP and how the highest level is NEP 2020 highlighted as an important issue for the whole country and improvement for the country. Thereby, he highlighted on the political support that will be available. While that being so, he also touched upon what is likely to be the issues that are likely to come across in its implementation. Policies do come up, but we fail in implementation in many areas. this can be avoided through the involvement of people at large. Mere political support will not be adequate. People at large must support this, and also a continuous coordination required with the education institutions, both at school level as at higher level, to make this policy an effective policy to be implemented. In addition to that, what large population has been involved in developing this policy. It is not as it has come out of a hat of some few people alone, but large number of people have exercised their minds and developed this policy, and thereby this acceptability and the ownership is likely to be much higher. Coming on to Mr. Anurag Becker, he has been a very effective speaker. More than what he spoke during his 15-minute talk, he answers to questions, clarified many doubts we are remembering in many people's minds. As a matter of fact, similar questions have been asked to me, which I have not been able to answer. So he has brought out very clearly what is the basic purpose of this NEP 2020. The purpose is to make an individual a better person, individual development, and also leading on to societal development. Sorry. Societal development. And here brought up very clearly what this policy aims in terms of bringing in equity right across the society in education matters. Beyond this, during the question and answer session, he brought up very clearly how this issue of CBSE state syllabus is addressed. That is through empowerment of respective institutions where they are enabled to pick up curriculum out of the National Curricular Framework 2021, which many people are aware of. To understand this whole game, he has highlighted essentiality to also go through the draft policy, which is a much bigger document. Merely reading through 66 pages or 64 pages would not suffice for people to get a clear understanding of this entire game. So to talk about the nuances of this entire policy, one needs to go through the other part of this into the last document, which compares about 460 pages or something like that. That is the draft policy. Then we came to Professor Shakira Shamsi, a very powerful speaker, very powerful and effective speaker. She has highlighted on the what is reforms are likely to lead us to. The NEP 2020 was very clear in that this aims at our education system and our society getting well meshed with the globalization that is taking place across societies. So globalization will also be addressed to this NEP 2020 by thinking about transformational changes in education, and she touched upon the importance to establish continuity between the school education as well as the higher education to bring about this transformation. Another aspect which was brought about by Professor Shamsi was the essentiality of lifetime learning. Whatever anybody learns in colleges after 3 years, that knowledge is said to become obsolescent. So she has highlighted very clearly that one needs to continue with the lifetime learning, and education system should provide opportunities for it. And she put in clearly the centrality of teachers' education. Even during the question and answer, when the problem of teacher well adept in teaching but not adequately qualified, what problem she faces and how that must be overcome through equipping oneself with necessary qualifications as demanded by the regulations. And she has also talked about recognition of private schools, the essentiality of private schools. Many people in private schools are a bane on the society, but she said that They are here to stay and they also play a major role. But through effective regulations, we should be able to render them, deliver the objectives to education we are set to deliver. And another point which she highlighted was the great autonomy to be given to higher education institutions to make them give degrees through their own programs. But this graded autonomy also needs to be properly introduced through the regulatory system where there is no flouting of laid down systems and practices. Now we come to Professor Kattimani TV. He emphasized on establishing equity and inclusiveness through this policy. He went at length on socially disadvantaged people, how the policy tries to address this, also in terms of facilitating their education, even right from the younger days, the early childhood education, the singular objective beyond teaching people the urban areas, the childhood education, and this policy aims at bringing to the fore the underdeveloped people in the rural areas as well as economically weaker sections so that their children also come to the required level. And he said that the policy facilitates empowerment of people through changes in the education system. So a special chapter on equity and inclusiveness addresses these issues. In addition, the NEP to a large extent tries to reduce the disadvantages amongst the populace where inequity exists in a very significant way. So Professor Kattimani has brought out the effect the policy is likely to bring about in reducing this inequity among the society, the education process. On the whole, all four speakers have definitely opened up the views of people to the society in large and thereby brought about a better understanding. I don't claim that this 1 hour or 2 hour session has clarified all aspects of the NEP 2020, but they have definitely highlighted what is the core message under NEP 2020, as well as emphasize that all of us need to go through the draft NEP 2020, the document, to get a clear understanding of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So we are at the end part of this event. And now over to Dr. Padmavati, Director SES, to give away vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Dharani. I'm privileged. On behalf of Karnataka State Rural Development and Panchayat Raj University and Center for Educational and Social Studies, I express my sincere gratitude to all the eminent speakers of this conclave, Professor M.K. Sridhar sir, Professor Kattimani sir, Dr. Anurag Bhair sir, and Shakila ma'am, for obliging to our request and for the excellent speech. Our sincere thanks to all our associates for co-organizing this conclave, especially to the members of the organizing committee, Professor Vishnukant Chitpalli sir, Vice Chancellor, KSRD PR University, Wing Commander Raghunath sir, Vice President SES, Dr. Prasanna Kumar, Chairman, Mahatma Gandhi National Council of Rural Education, Professor Madheshwaran sir, Director, Institute of Socio and Economic Change, Professor Ramchandra Gowda, Vice Chancellor, Rani Chennamma University, Professor Sidhu Algur, Vice Chancellor, Vijayanagara Sri Krishnadevaraya University, Professor Baiju, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Kerala, Professor Anup K. Singh, Director General, Nirma University, and Dr. Manjunath, Associate Director, Azim Premji University, for making this conclave happen. My thanks also to the conveners, Dr. Habay Kumar and Ms. Soumya and her team at the university, as well as, most importantly, to all the participants for making this happen, without whom this conclave wouldn't have gone ahead. I conclude my words with an invite from SES to all the higher education institutions with the permission of our Honorable President, to continue this collaboration for implementing the policy in its fullest spirit and philosophy. CES will be very pleased to partner with all the higher education institutions within Karnataka and across India to implement the policy under the guidance of its Honorable President, Professor M.K. Sridhar sir, who is also the member of the UGC and also has played a very critical role in making this NEP 2020. I thank once again one and all, and I hope this collaboration will continue further to implement, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you again.
Dharani,
Yes, sir.
request for closure.
Yes, sir. Thank you all once again. So let's all work together with true spirit for the implementation of this new national education policy effectively. Thank you. Good